Some ideas take a while for people to catch on to. The Cape Independence idea has been with us since 2007, but most recently it's been driven to a large degree by Phil Craig. He is the co-founder of the Cape Independence Advocacy Group and leader of the Referendum Party. We're going to get an update from him today. I'll say an update, and thank you for joining us today, Phil. It has been quite a tumultuous year. From you personally getting attacked by Herman Mashaba saying you must get out the country because how dare you think that the Cape should be, have its independence, and then for the country as a whole, it's just got crazy what's happening now. And the most recent development being the head of the Defense Force going to Iran to go and put a stick in the eye of the Americans at exactly the time that the country is negotiating to reduce sanctions that'll put at least 100,000 people out of jobs. So it is insane, it appears to be. From your perspective, from the idea whose time perhaps has come or is coming, what's the momentum been like for Cape Independence recently?
Well, I think in a funny kind of way, we've had to be patient, which is the hardest thing of all to do. You know, we laid out our stall before 2024. We said the MPC, the multi-party charter, is an absolute disaster. It's got no hope of removing the ANC, and actually, you're just going to end up with an ANC government or worse. Yeah, as often the case, it's not always nice to be right. For us, that was a very obvious outcome, but sometimes, yeah, the waiter says the plate's hot, don't touch it, and what do we all do? We go touch the plate. So here we are. We're where we inevitably were going to be. South Africa has got some fundamental problems which don't come ironically from the ANC. The ANC is the symptom. The problem is the system of government that we have here in South Africa, which is we've got this hugely diverse country. And we have a unitary state where the dominant cultural, ideological group dictates terms to everybody else. That is a recipe for disaster, and it's been disaster since 1910 and the formation of South Africa, always for somebody, and this is the inevitable outcome. And we're sitting here waiting for the penny to drop for people, and funny enough, not necessarily for always ideological reasons. But I often take inspiration from a politician that people might be surprised at, and that will be Helen Suzman. And I think, yeah, Helen Suzman stood there as one MP against 399. It was hopeless. It was pointless. But, she just had to keep on flying the flag because eventually you can't outrun reality. And that's where we are with Cape Independence. We have to keep flying the flag because ultimately South Africa cannot outrun reality.
Just remind us why the Western Cape is different.
Well, so ideologically, it can stem. Yeah, there are obviously lots of components there, but fundamentally, the easiest way to look at it is to say at election results. We live in a democracy, and we decide how we're governed by voting. And for 31 years, the Western Cape has voted fundamentally differently from the rest of South Africa. So the people of the Western Cape, without a shadow of doubt, objectively want to be governed in a different manner to the manner in which the majority of South Africans want to be governed. And the essence of Cape Independence then is to say, look, we've got nothing against the rest of South Africa. I think South Africa actually could benefit from many of the same solutions. But the reality is we can't continue to be governed by a government that we didn't vote for, which is performing absolutely disastrously. And without Cape Independence, we don't get the government we voted for, and we can't remove the government we didn't vote for. We're trapped in this system. And yeah, that's very much the essence of Cape Independence. And in many ways, you talked about the US, and that perhaps is a fantastic lens for us to look through. This absolute catastrophe that's unfolding on South Africa wouldn't be unfolding on the Western Cape if we had Cape Independence. In the Western Cape, we're quite clear. We agree with most of the values of the US. They would be our natural ally. We certainly wouldn't be antagonistic. We'd see them as a key trading partner. We'd see them as a global ally. We'd be keen to have investment from them, and we'd have a solid relationship. Instead, we're sitting here watching, this disaster unfold, despite the fact that we are vehemently opposed proposed to the South African government. And I was at a conference last week, and I spoke to Joshua Maservi from the Hudson Institute from Washington, who I've spoken to before. When I was out in Washington, and I said to him, Joshua, what must Western communities in South Africa do? Because you're saying, listen, this is what South Africa must do, but you have to understand that we don't agree with our government, and everything you're saying we should do, we are doing. And that's the essence of Cape Independence. We can create a far better life for ourselves in the Western Cape if we can make our own decisions based upon our democratic will.
Now, you've been working for years now trying to get a referendum by the people of the Western Cape. You even have a political party called the Referendum Party. What progress are you making on that front?
Well, so interestingly enough, we've had a change of tack. So we negotiated a referendum. I personally agreed a referendum with John Steenhuisen, who promised that the DA would call a referendum which included a question on Cape independence, and ultimately the DA reneged on that agreement. And they say this, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is insanity. We've stopped at this point in time trying to lobby the DA into calling a referendum, and we're busy organising a private referendum, and in either late 2026 or early 2027 is our best forecast at the moment. We are going to organise a private referendum, or a referendum of the Western Cape, which will be privately organised. Of all 3.2 million Western Cape voters, and we're going to hold our own referendum on Cape independence. And there's precedent for this. We're not the first people to do this. The Italian province of Veneto did exactly the same thing when their government was denying them a referendum. They held their own referendum. They won. Ultimately, that led into a process which gave them fiscal autonomy, tax raising powers, and a much better settlement than the one they had. So we're not going to beg the DA anymore to listen to the Western Cape people. We're just going to do it ourselves.
But the DA itself is on the back foot. It's part of a government of national unity that has performed appallingly and continues to lurch from one crisis to the other. It kicked out a speaker to truth in Emma Powell, which has not gone unnoticed amongst voters. And on top of all of this, the whole premise of getting together in the government of national unity was to grow the economy, and it's been going backwards. So it doesn't appear as though the DA has got a heck of a lot of options, and yet it does not see this as an opportunity. From where you're sitting, and you do talk to these people often, why is that?
Alan Windy. And let me first put that in context. I think Alan Windy has done a remarkable job of governing the Western Cape. I think he's a fantastic bureaucrat. But if I summed up the problem, it's Alan Windy. And why do I say that? The DA in theory is a federal party. It's got a federal constitution, so therefore the national DA should be looking after the national interests of the party, and I think that does that. We can argue whether it's well or not, but I think it genuinely carries out its mandate. The Western Cape DA is forms the Western Cape government, and it was elected by the Western Cape people. Its job is fundamentally to act in the best interests of the Western Cape people. And the very nature of federalism is that you have this contest of ideas of interests that may not align, and federalism allows this regional contest of ideas. So we should have Alan Windy saying, guys, we don't want to be in this system. Why do we keep having to implement all of these policies that we didn't vote for? We were, just recently, the DA have put out an economic plan for how South Africa could be saved. We agree with every word of it, or almost every word of it, and we said so publicly. The point is that they can't implement it at a national level, but they could implement it in the Western Cape. They could save the people of the Western Cape. And the Western DA should be driving, at very least, federalism, and in our view, full on independence. But they won't, because Alan Windy says we're South African first. And I've said it many times before. I believe for that statement, Alan Windy needs to decide if he wants to be for South Africa first. That's perfectly fine. But then he should resign and go and stand as an MP in the national parliament, which serves the South African people. If he wants to lead the Western Cape, then he should act in the best interests of the Western Cape people. And he doesn't, because he says we're all South Africans first. And that is the core issue. And if we had a secessionist leading the DA in the Western Cape, we would end up with a very, very different state of affairs, and the people of the Western Cape would be materially better off.
It's so interesting, this point. Clearly, if Alan Windy went to Parliament rather than led the Western Cape, he'd have to move out of that fantastic home that he occupies, which is for the Premier of the Western Cape. And there are many people who say that, or who are now pointing out that politicians are people too, and it's almost like the DA has been seduced by power. Now they have blue light brigades, or at least access to it. Now they have much higher salaries than they had previously when they are cabinet ministers. Now they're part of making decisions which enable the implementation of power rather than just looking on from the sidelines. Is there anything that the DA has done since being part of the government of national unity, and it's well over a year now that they've been there, which has enhanced this strategy towards greater autonomy for the Western Cape or for other provinces in that matter, which is central to the whole thesis of the party and why people voted for them?
No, quite the opposite. And I haven't got it in front of me because I didn't know you were going to ask me this question. So I'm going verbatim. If you go back to the DA's Western Cape conference that they held just before the election, John Steenhuisen, you can Google it, it's there, made a promise. On our very first day in government, we will table an autonomy bill for powers for the Western Cape. On our very first day in government. Well, where is it? Yeah, actually, yeah, and unfortunately, the DA have got a history of reneging on the promises they made. They reneged on the referendum promise. They blocked federalism in the Western Cape, which is a compromise we talked to them about, even though it's their policy. And John Steenhuisen, in his election campaigning in the Western Cape, said, "Vote for us. Don't vote for Cape Independence. You don't need to vote for Cape Independence. Vote for us because the very first day in government, we're going to table an autonomy bill for the Western Cape." And he lied. He didn't do it. He's in government. He didn't do it.
Wow. Okay, so the majority of people in the Western Cape are coloured. That's 53% of the population. The leader of the coloured party, if you want to put it that way, is Gayton McKenzie. He's been staunchly anti Cape independence, but now he's feeling the kind of vitriol that you were subjected to in social media and so on was something that he did many years ago.
Yeah.
Is this not an opportunity for you to perhaps get him to reassess his position from where you stand anyway?
Well, look, so we have to sort of separate. I'm sort of less fussed about political leaders. We have to deal with political leaders. As you say, the largest demographic group in the Western Cape is the so-called coloured people, who obviously are a diverse community even within themselves. But we know from polling that it's been clear for the last 3 or 4 years the strongest support for Cape independence is amongst the coloured community. They've always been the biggest group numerously, but that's been a consistent feature of our polling. And coloured people in the Western Cape instinctively support Cape independence. They're from the Cape. It's their country. They're connected to the Cape in a way that they're not connected to Limpopo or to KZN. So they naturally support independence. They naturally have frustration. Gayton is out of touch with that community, but it's fine. He's entitled to do his own view. Now, I have my issues with Gayton. I think he's yeah, I think he's quite outspoken on issues, and he doesn't always follow through and deliver. And I think he's quite populist. But I've actually publicly spoken out in support of him in terms of this of the vitriol that's come, such as I've seen. I mean, I think this notion of I know we saw the same thing with Ronaldo House. Context is everything. And in South Africa, if you say something, yeah, people there's this mob hounds you, and they don't look at the context in what you say. And both in the bits that I've seen of Gayton and with Ronaldo House, yeah, they were trying to emphasize a point, and maybe it was ill judged, maybe it wasn't ill judged, but somebody who's trying to make a point, is not the same as somebody who uses a word with intentional to be offensive and rude, and it's ridiculous. So I absolutely stick up for Gayton on that point. But I think in terms of taking stick, if you're in our profession, yeah, you'll be the same. Like, you take stick, and frankly, in our profession, if you're taking stick, it's a good day, because now you're poking the bruise. If I wake up and five political parties are calling to have me thrown out of the country, that's a great day. At the end of the day, now people are hearing my message, and I don't know. I think it was I can't. I think it might have been Mae West, but there's a saying: so the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about, and that's definitely the case in politics. And I have my big differences with Gayton, but he's what he's achieved is quite remarkable, and he certainly managed to sort of turn the political situation on his head. And ironically, He may well be an outspoken opponent of Cape independence, but he's likely to be somebody who's very key in delivering it because he is probably the person that's going to bring the DA under 50% and force them into a situation in the Western Cape where they have to look around for allies. And bearing in mind that the DA's constituency is strongly pro Cape independence, that puts us in a better position. Mhm.
Well, it's very interesting that you say that the constituency of the Patriotic Alliance is also pro Cape independence. The political analysts tell me the reason why the DA is hanging in there in the government of national unity is it thinks it's going to benefit from it at the next election next year. It's a gamble. It's a long way off yet. But getting back to the present, your did you go to Washington? Well, you went to Washington clearly to meet with Josh. But were there other people that you met when you were there? And did anyone really listen to your story?
No, absolutely. I was there for 5 weeks, and I can tell you, a lot of people listened to our story. And it was a fascinating period of time, and I came away with an awful lot of insights. And we engaged the in the political system. We were engaged in the system in with the government itself. We met with the think tank, lobby groups, military people. Yeah, so I really consulted very, very widely, and it was fascinating. And I came away with a number of insights. First of all, if we could, if we can deliver Cape independence in the Western Cape, or get to the point where it's supportable, the US is going to support us in a heartbeat. That's absolutely clear. I can say that unequivocally. That they're not going to say that publicly. They didn't say it in as many words to me, but it's absolutely clear that we have their moral and ideological support for this. They absolutely understand the issues that are there, but what we have to realize, we obviously, whenever South Africa is in the news in the US, we hear it and we kind of think, hang on a second, all the US does is talk about South Africa. South Africa is a blip on the radar in the US, and that's the one thing that I had to learn for myself. That if you take up of the bandwidth, if South Africa takes up a quarter of 1% of the US's bandwidth, that's our reality. And we might always hear about that quarter of 1%, but they're not spending their life talking about South Africa and our problems. And the one message that I brought back really to the Cape independence movement is these guys will absolutely support us. Now is our time, but we've got to do the hard work. We've got it. They're not going to come and magically deliver it for us. We're going to have to do it ourselves. And if they do it ourselves, we've got a strong ally. And I've got we developed some really strong allies behind the scenes, and people who will publicly start to come out and to make noises in our favor. But we've got to create the momentum here. And actually, that helped a lot. I came back. We're busy with a big unification project inside of the Cape independence movement. The referendum party, the Cape Independence Party, Cape Exit, who've got 840,000 members, and the CIAG signed a memorandum of understanding about a month and a half ago, and we're very far down the road in terms of this combined effort that's going to resolve in this referendum being held privately. That's one of the key issues for there, and we need to create that. Which then you can imagine, if we're sitting here in 18 months' time and we've got a referendum win, which has been inspected and overseen by the international community, and we can go and say, look, the DA may be blocking an official referendum on Cape independence, but here's the private referendum. You inspected it. You've seen it was of all 3.2 million people of the Western Cape, and we can prove beyond a shadow of doubt that the majority of people in the Western Cape favour Cape independence. That is going to radically change the game, and that's our project. And I think on the back of that, the US will do a lot. I mean, look, ironically, there are delegations. There's a US delegation in the Western Cape at the moment, discussing specifically Cape independence. And I'm not going to give all of the details, but those interactions are going on. So yes, there is definitely interest in this project at all levels of government, including the very highest in the US.
Just say that again. There's a delegation from the US in the Cape at the moment
Yeah, not
talking about
not a
Cape
government
independence.
delegation, I hasten to add, but yeah, there is currently a group of US businessmen and political figures who are in the South Africa currently engaging in the Western Cape around the subject of Cape independence, and that's an ongoing discussion between yeah, the Cape independence movement and the international community. That's not something that's new, but it's something that's definitely accelerated under this or the current US regime, because we recognise that this is a moment.
It'll be interesting to see whether Brett Mazel gets confirmed, Bazel rather, gets confirmed as the ambassador to South Africa, because he would clearly have similar viewpoints, which would probably ally or align with those that you've expressed. But just looking at South Africa, where we are right now, the visit by the chief of the defense force to Iran at such a sensitive moment has got me and I mean, got people thinking, and myself included, that maybe there's a heck of a lot going on behind the scenes that we don't understand. This is not a rogue general. This guy is a battle hardened veteran who led South African troops to their greatest military engagement since apartheid. So let's just put that on the line. This is no political appointee. He's a proper general. Plus, you have Mkwanazi, who is calling out others, but clearly they are enjoying the fruits of their power in KwaZulu Natal. Now, neither of these people, the one in the police, the other in the defense force, have been sanctioned in any meaningful manner. So that's got to tell you something else. Should something happen on those lines, i.e., if the militarists decide to take matters into their own hands, how would that affect what you are trying to do in a democratic sphere?
Yeah, look, I mean, look, I hope never to find out. Look, I mean, unfortunately, I think we recognise that our military is extremely weak, and I doubt whether the South African state has
I'm
got the
going to stop
capacity
you
to.
there. I'm going to stop
Okay.
you there because in 2013, when General Mafwanya and 200 troops were in the Central African Republic, 200 troops. And they were there as part of a coordination between, or a pact between the Zuma government and the then president of the CAR. Those 200 troops saw off 7,000 rebels for 3 days in an attempt to protect the president. And those were special branch, they were special forces. Colonel Dixon was there. This is not, we don't have an impotent army. We are told, it's almost like a view that, South Africa's army can do nothing and South Africa's police are damn useless. There are, there's still a residual of very, very strong uh, uh, a base in the military and in the police who might think that they could run the country better than the corrupt politicians, and we know they're corrupt. So it's no longer on the realms of impossibility. It is a possibility if you have a look at the history. You know what happened in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique, where you had the infiltration from the Islamists. They've done it all over Africa, but nowhere else in Africa have they been kicked out. South Africans went in there and got rid of them. So it's now be interesting to see the South Africans are out of there. Our troops left in the end of July, but this fantasy that we have an impotent army is one that we need to address. It is perhaps not the truth. So put that aside. Were it to happen, what would the reaction be from your side?
Well, look, I think, yeah, of course, it would be, extraordinarily helpful, provided we still had a regime that we could operate within democratically. I mean, I think it's one of the key challenges for us. I mean, clearly, yeah, as you said, when I went to the US, it wasn't just Herman Mashar, but there were many parties wanting to be thrown out. The president himself came out against me. But before we went, we got a legal opinion, and we wrote to the president and said, look, this is the legal basis for Cape independence. This is the legal basis for campaigning for it overseas. We think we're perfectly entitled to do this within the South African constitution. But look, you know what? If you think we're not, we'll give you 7 days for you to articulate your view to us before we go, and then we'll take that under consideration. The president chose not to do that. And the reality is, despite all of the pressure that I take to have me thrown out of the country, I'm here, I'm talking to you, and I'm carrying out my life in a relatively normal and free fashion, because despite all of our faults, we still live in a constitutional democracy that may not be perfect. So in a situation where there's a military coup, but the Western Cape retained its capacity for democratic operation, then I'm absolutely certain it would be an absolute gold mine to us. But of course, it's going to be a complete unknown. And we've never we don't we've not got involved quite consciously in any solutions that are military, that would not be constitutional, and would be against our mandate. There obviously are organisations that sort of prepare for doomsday, I have no idea what. I couldn't speak for them. I don't belong to any of them, and I don't have really any dealings with them. What I do know is the statistics that, for example, in the Western Cape, that the private security personnel outnumber government personnel 10 to 1. And we saw in the 2021 riots that it was the civilians protecting the police in the end, and not the other way around. So I take your point that not everybody's a fool in the forces, but actually, if we look at what's actually played out in those situations, people have power, and I think were the Western Cape people to be provoked into a response, it would probably be helpful for Cape Independence. I'd really pray to God we never have to find that out. We need to do this politically, and peacefully. My colleague, actually, Dr. Joan Swart at the CIG, she's literally just written an article that's published, I think, yesterday on Defence Web on this exact issue. So that may be worth people wanting to go and read, talking about, is there going to be a coup? And her assessment, she's a military expert, and her assessment is no, there's not going to be a coup. There's perhaps going to be a widespread unrest, but she doesn't believe that there's going to be a coup.
But the mere fact that we're talking in that way, the mere fact that she's writing to answer that question, tells you that the risk, which was non-existent in 1994, is now, well, it's somewhere on the radar. It might be very low, but we don't know these things, do we? And Paul O'Sullivan keeps reminding us about General Mkhwanazi. Be careful of what you wish for, because were it to be implemented, who knows where it might all end up. Good talking with you again, Phil. Thank you for updating us on the progress there. You've got to feel, though, that the Gatvol factor just continues to grow in South Africa for many reasons, helped along by recent events. And it's an interesting point that you make, that the different disparate bodies who are agitating for Cape independence are now coming together. And that is a sign for all of those on that side of the fence, perhaps to be encouraged. Phil Craig is the leader of the Referendum Party. He's the co-founder of the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. And I'm Alec Hogg from BizNews.com.